This poor man was kept by the rich. In just 1 year, he gained 500 pounds. The rich were all slim, and could enjoy the pleasure of drinking cola, but the risk of gaining weight was borne entirely by the poor. Such an absurd scene occurred decades later. In 2074, the Earth underwent tremendous changes. Multinational corporations controlled 90% of the globe. Natural resources became increasingly scarce. Major companies engaged in fierce competition for this reason. The people working for these companies lived in green zones protected by high walls. Those who couldn't afford to enter the walls lived in the red zones. Ben was an upper-class person living in the green zone. He lived a happy life, with substantial savings. His home was filled with high-tech products. Just as the couple was celebrating their anniversary, a news report came on the television. Ben's company, Spiga, was attacked by terrorists. Authorities believed it was the work of a radical organization called Children of Tomorrow. Spiga's laboratory was bombed, and dozens of other people lost their lives. The company's stock price plummeted. Meanwhile, Spiga's competitor, Izanawa stock soared to new heights. After the attack, Spiga tightened security and personnel arrangements. They conducted inspections at various checkpoints in the green zone. Ben drove to the company, waiting in line at the entrance for security checks. His colleagues around him were chatting about the rumor that the murderer was Izanago. After the inspection, Ben successfully entered the company and began his work. He and his boss Peterson were explaining the latest developed Clarity software to the security minister. This software can scan the brainwaves of the subjects being tested and convert the brainwaves into images. Moreover, the Clarity software can also scan dreams. It is an extremely advanced lie detector. It is of great help in investigating the suspects of the company attack. However, the current accuracy rate of the Clarity software is only about 50%. Minister Morse was very dissatisfied with this. He ordered them to improve it as soon as possible. The scene shifts to the red zone. A boy is brought before the local boss Terrence. The boy's name is Sim. He is young and impulsive. Sim stole Terrence's cigarette business, so he was captured for a lesson. Terrence ordered his men to hold Sim down. He intended to cut off Sim's fingers, but upon seeing the wounds on his men's faces, Terrence became curious about Sim's skills, so he changed his mind and let Sim demonstrate. Unexpectedly, Sim was quite skilled. He still has an advantage. When facing two people, Terrence immediately decided to recruit Sim. Meanwhile, in the green zone, Ben, who already has a wife, is staring at a photo of his ex-girlfriend Elena. He takes out a mysterious device. Ben inputs Elena's face into it, then conducts a search across the city's various corners. In the end, he finds a woman in the crowd, with a resemblance of up to 73%. In the evening, Ben is on a date with his wife at a restaurant. Laura tells him a good news. Her pregnancy application has been approved. They can have their own child now. However, Ben's mind is filled with thoughts of his ex-girlfriend. He is not very happy about this, but Ben still maintains the image of a gentle husband. The next day at work, Ben arrives at the office of President Elizabeth. In her work, Elizabeth is a very capable person. In her personal life, she is Laura's mother. However, the mother and daughter are not close. From her conversation with Ben, it is evident that her relationship with her daughter even relies on Ben to maintain. As the daughter of the president of Spiga, Laura is actually a cosmetic surgeon. One day, she is communicating with a man who is kept by a wealthy woman about a cosmetic surgery plan. The man listens to everything the wealthy woman says, but Laura insists on respecting his own wishes. At this moment, Ben made a phone call. He planned to go to the red zone for drinks with his colleagues that night. Ben invited Laura to join him. Laura was initially going to agree, but when she heard the bar was called Sasgate, she immediately declined and seemed to have a shadow over that place. After hanging up the phone, Laura recalled her painful past experiences. Her emotions collapsed immediately. On the other side, Ben found his colleague Hendrik and said he had discovered Elena's whereabouts and stated that he wanted to save Elena by getting a promotion. Hendrik obviously had some connection to Elena as well, but he advised Ben against taking risks, because the higher up he went, the fewer opportunities Ben would have to cover up. Moreover, Ben was about to have a child, and he should live a stable life. Hendrik told Ben, after having a child, his life goals would change. When the agreed time arrived, Ben met up with his colleagues, Roger and others. Among them was also his boss Peterson. The group happily entered the red zone. The security here was chaotic, with not only special workers hustling for clients, but also thugs from different gangs gathering in the corners. They arrived at a bar, where two burly men were fighting in a ring. The atmosphere was very lively. The group gathered together to drink. Peterson got drunk from their excessive drinking. Ben voluntarily helped him to the restroom. As Peterson leaned over the toilet to vomit, Ben quickly extracted a vial of blood from his neck. When he came out, he was spotted by an Izano employee. Ben immediately knocked him out cold. Then he made an excuse to leave. Ben arrived in front of a building and took out a stack of cash. Ben pulled out a bill from inside and handed it to the thug at the door. The thug was quite displeased with this, but he seemed somewhat wary of Ben. The thug could only let him in. Inside the room, Ben found Theo. Theo told him that he had joined Terrence's organization. He had become a boxer. Ben was not very approving of this, but he had more important things to discuss. He had found Theo's sister Elena. She had been sent to Arcadia, which is a private club for the upper echelons of Spiga. Ben needed to become a senior executive on the 40th floor before he could possibly rescue Elena. Ben looked at the blood sample from his boss in his hand, and he already had a plan in mind. Back at the company, Ben applied for a set of whistle devices. Then he went to Peterson's office. While chatting with him, Ben quietly pressed the switch. The whistle weapon could induce discomfort. Peterson thought it was just nausea from his hangover. He immediately ran to the restroom. Ben seized the opportunity to open Peterson's computer and dripped the previously extracted blood sample into the verification device. After gaining access through Peterson's credentials, Ben copied all the necessary data. Along the way, he nearly got caught twice. Fortunately, he escaped unharmed. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was conversing with a wealthy lady. Suddenly, a waiter brought a box and handed it to the lady. The wealthy lady immediately realized that her husband had been kidnapped, but she was not in a hurry to ransom him back. At this moment, Laura arrived at the scene and sat down to talk with her mother. Both of them felt a bit awkward. Laura mentioned her late father, blaming her mother for his death in her words. They quickly began to argue. Elizabeth brought up the time Laura had been kidnapped before. The criminals had even cut off Laura's ear at that time, sending it to Elizabeth as a ransom demand. Laura was clearly triggered by this, and she angrily turned to leave. On Ben's side, the employees were lining up for security checks. Suddenly, an alarm went off. It turned out that the device detected Peterson attempting to take confidential information out. Security personnel immediately arrested him. Peterson shouted loudly that he was unaware of it. Ben stood by. His expression showed some guilt. Meanwhile, Elizabeth called an emergency meeting. She told the employees that the company had found an insider. He had been taken to the confinement room for interrogation. At the same time, there was good news. The position on the 40th floor was now vacant. The higher-ups were evaluating candidates. Ben was confident that he would succeed. He was determined to rescue Elena. The scene shifts back to 12 years ago. At that time, Ben was just an ordinary kid in the red zone. His father, unable to cope with the collapse of society, left his son a message to live on, and then jumped to his death. Ben became an orphan. To survive, he pretended to be blind and wandered the streets. Ben deliberately bumped into a man. He took the opportunity to extract the man's retinal data, but this action was noticed by Hendrik. Hendrik seemed to have something to say. Seeing that Hendrik wanted to catch him, Ben hurriedly ran away. Elena saved him. Ben thanked her. Then he brought Elena to a device. Ben obtained additional supplies through validation using the freshly extracted retina. He shared part of it with Elena. In the end, Ben was found by Hendrik again, but Hendrik only wanted to know where Ben had obtained the retinal scanner he had been using. Ben said he had made it himself. Hendrik realized that Ben was a genius. He invited Ben to make money together. The scene shifts back to 2074. Elizabeth was discussing with Security Minister Morse the matter of the insider. Peterson insisted that he was unaware of anything. There is currently no progress in the investigation. Morse suggested taking the opportunity to conduct counterintelligence technology screenings on all company personnel, in hopes of uncovering Peterson's accomplices or witnesses. Meanwhile, Ben took out his homemade device lockpick to sneak a peek at the surveillance in the confinement room. Peterson had already been tortured severely. Seeing this scene, Ben felt even more guilt inside. The office door was suddenly pushed open. Security personnel were conducting a surprise inspection. Ben hurriedly put away the lockpick. Meanwhile, inside the confinement room, Morse asked Peterson why he went to the red zone the night before. Peterson recalled for a moment and said it was Ben's suggestion. Ben was completely unaware of this. He was chatting with Hendrik. Hendrik guessed his plan. Hendrik urged him to stop this dangerous behavior. Ben didn't care about that. At this moment, Roger walked over. Ben took the opportunity to persuade him to align with him, to say that the trip to the red zone was Peterson's idea. Otherwise, they could both get implicated. Sure enough, not long after, Ben was found by Morse and taken away for questioning. Morse asked why they had gone to the red zone. Ben said it was Peterson's suggestion. Morse was a bit surprised. This was different from Peterson's statement, but Morse didn't say much more. As he was leaving, Ben noticed that security personnel outside were conducting checks on the employees. He worried that the lockpick on him would be discovered, so Ben returned to Morse's office. He pretended to remember some intelligence, taking the opportunity to stick the lockpick under the office desk. Then he left safely. In the red zone, Theo was having a meal with his friend Anthony. Anthony said being a boxer was too dangerous. He advised Theo to give up this profession. Theo reassured him that it was fine. Suddenly, Terrence walked in. He ordered his men to hold Theo down. Terrence used a freeze spray to reduce the swelling on Theo's face. He wanted Theo to fight again, because at that time, the headhunter Bill, who specialized in the private league for the Green Zone, would also come to watch the match. When Theo heard that becoming a boxer in the Green Zone would give him a chance to enter Arcadia, he agreed to take the fight. Inside Spiga, Elizabeth was telling Ben that he had been selected as a candidate for the 40th floor. Elizabeth hinted to Ben that the higher up he went, the fewer secrets he could hide. If he had any unspeakable secrets, it would be best to disclose them now. Ben pondered for a moment and said he could withstand scrutiny. After seeing Peterson's family's situation, Laura decided to plead with her mother. She threatened to withhold having a child. Ultimately, Laura got Elizabeth to agree to help. Inside the confinement room, Morse was still interrogating Peterson. Security personnel came in and said they discovered that someone had used unauthorized technology. Morse immediately went out to investigate. Meanwhile, when Ben went to the office to retrieve the lockpick, he found that the lockpick was missing. Laura found Peterson's wife and told her that she couldn't help Peterson, but she could help ensure that their child could continue living in the Green Zone. However, the parents would have to give up visitation rights, compared to letting the child suffer in the slums. This was the best outcome possible. Peterson's wife agreed. Inside Spiga, Morse believes Peterson lacked motive, and there was no evidence to prove that he was the insider. However, the company's stock price continued to plummet. To stabilize the market, Elizabeth ordered an immediate conclusion to the matter. In the Red Zone's arena, Theo's match began. His opponent, Da, was very powerful. Theo was knocked to the ground, but he quickly regrouped. Theo launched a fierce counterattack, and Da was not to be outdone. After taking a few punches, he once again rendered Theo unable to fight back. In order to enter the Green Zone to find his sister, Theo picked up a hidden weapon and slashed at Da's face. Then he mounted D and started punching. Ultimately, Theo won the match. Unexpectedly, Terrence didn't actually want him to win. Tonight's match was meant for Da to be scouted by the headhunter, but Da ended up losing badly to Theo. Terrence's plan was ruined.
Yeah.
In Theo's terrified gaze, Terrence congratulated Theo on becoming Da's successor. Meanwhile, Ben's whistle device was discovered. Morse questioned if he had used this to make Peterson feel uncomfortable, and then took the opportunity to steal secrets from Peterson's computer. Ben strongly refuted his viewpoint. He had already altered the timestamps, so it appeared that he had no time to commit the crime. Morse said he wanted to hear Peterson's words. However, Elizabeth, wanting to close the case quickly, had wiped all of Peterson's memories. Peterson's wife was sent to the Red Zone. Their child was adopted by a couple in the Green Zone, and he himself was carelessly tossed into the Red Zone. He didn't even know his own name. The scene shifts. The lockpick lay quietly on the table. A hand picked it up. The owner of the hand turned out to be Ben's colleague Roger. At Ben's home, Laura was discussing with Ben when to get the IUD. Ben was still preoccupied with his ex-girlfriend, and kept delaying the timing. Upon hearing this, at this moment, Hendrik came by with his daughter. He took the opportunity to share some intelligence with Ben. Among the 5 girls from Arcadia, one had been shot for attempting to resist, but he couldn't confirm if it was Elena. Ben felt even worse. This wasn't the only bad news. He had also lost the lockpick. Although the lockpick had a self-destruct mechanism, there might be someone who could modify the protocol. Hendrik urged Ben to let go of the past, but Ben couldn't do that. He had to rescue Elena. The scene shifts back 6 years. After some inquiries, Ben found Elena, who had been taken away by his aunt when she was a child. as he took out the token she had given him during their farewell. The two embraced happily, but they didn't have time to catch up. Elena had to go to class to win a scholarship. Ben walked her to the classroom door. He noticed that Elena's hands were trembling. Ben felt worried and leaned against the window to observe secretly. He happened to notice Elena fainting and falling to the ground due to massive information input into her brain. Ben rushed in to save Elena. Back in 2074, Spiga was preparing to discuss with Izano how to divide the market share. Elizabeth, while communicating with the rival company's vice president Diana, received a signal that Diana was considering switching jobs. Elizabeth realized that this was a bargaining chip to win against Izano in the negotiations. But how to take Diana away under everyone's gaze was a problem. Ben suggested using the bodies of the deceased girls from Arcadia as a cover to pull off a sleight of hand. Elizabeth thought this method was feasible. Meanwhile, Laura saw on her way home that the housekeeper was being arrested by the police for stealing her belongings. Laura intervened to exonerate the housekeeper and save her. Back at home, the housekeeper finally revealed the truth. It turned out she did this to raise money to pay for her neighbor's daughter's medical treatment. Upon hearing this, Laura told the housekeeper to bring the girl to the green zone for treatment. Laura arrived at the border between the red zone and the green zone. She successfully picked up the neighbor's daughter. Inside Spiga, Diana walked into the restroom. Under the cover of a privacy device, she successfully met up with Elizabeth. Diana said she was pregnant. She didn't want her child to be born into a world where Izanoa's drones wreaked havoc. Therefore, Diana offered to trade Izanoa's confidential research, asking Spiga to help her get rid of Izano to prevent employee betrayal. Izano had implanted a virus in Diana's blood, called the Lockscythe virus. This virus could only be eradicated by another vice president, Mason. The Spiga team immediately began to think of solutions to confirm whether the deceased girl was Elena. He volunteered to carry out the task of altering the Lockscythe programming. Elizabeth teased him about being eager for a promotion. Roger glanced at Ben after hearing this. After work, Roger went to the red zone to find a hacker and asked her to help disable the lockpick's self-destruct protocol to get a promotion. Roger decided to take action against Ben. The hacker quickly identified information about the lockpick. In addition, she also uncovered a lot of personal information about Roger, such as the fact that his mother had passed away. Roger angrily asked her what she was trying to do. The hacker said that if he wanted her help, he would have to give her some entertainment. Thus, Roger was forced to catch rats in the dirty red zone. To catch the rats, he got himself dirty. The hacker was curious why Roger, as the son of Spiga's biggest supplier, had come to the red zone to seek her help. It seemed that no one but the hacker could unlock the lockpick. Thus, the hacker became even more smug. She had grown up in the slums, eating rats since childhood. The hacker suggested she wanted to see Roger taste a rat. In the end, Roger ate the rat. Seeing him so obedient, she gave him the decryption code for the lockpick and mentioned that she had recorded the previous scene. Roger angrily lunged at the hacker. He was knocked to the ground, looking quite disheveled. However, Roger finally uncovered Ben's hidden secret. It turned out that Ben was looking for a woman. After anxiously waiting, Ben finally got to see the girl's body. However, when he pulled back the white cloth, he found that the body had been altered to look like Diana. The body was all prepared. Elizabeth had hidden the toxin in her nails. While negotiating with Izanoa's employees, she quietly injected the toxin into Diana's skin. After a while, Diana suddenly went into cardiac arrest. She had the Lockscythe toxin in her system. If she received an electric shock, she would surely die. Ben pretended to be unaware and rushed in to rescue Diana. Mason had no choice but to temporarily disable the Lockscythe. Then, Ben made an excuse to take Diana to the hospital and pushed Diana into the elevator. Morse had been waiting in the elevator for a long time. With their cooperation, they successfully completed the exchange. After the mission was completed, someone handed Ben the belongings of the deceased girl. Ben found Elena's necklace in it. He immediately fell into memories. Ben couldn't believe that Elena, who had once shared hardships with him, was dead. Ben returned home. On this day, both he and Laura had gone through a lot. They both felt exhausted. Ben had already learned that Elena was dead. He decided to let go of everything and live his life with Laura. So Ben found Theo. He handed him Elena's belongings. Ben told him that Elena was dead.
Familial DNA detected. Play recording.
Hey Theo, it's me, your big sis.
Elena's virtual image floated in the air. She said she had given the necklace to her friend. It turned out that the one who died was not Elena. Elena also said they would have their memories wiped regularly if there ever came a day of reunion. She hoped Theo can forgive Elena after discovering that she doesn't remember him. The scene shifts back 6 years. Rebecca, the expansion manager at Spiga, came to Elena's home. She told Elena that she had only placed second in the exam, and therefore, she would not receive the scholarship. However, Rebecca also said that although Elena had lost the chance to attend school, but she could still join Arcadia. Rebecca wanted her to become a plaything of Spiga's upper management. Elena's father, enraged, pointed a gun at Rebecca. Unexpectedly, the bodyguard raised his gun as well. In a critical moment, Ben burst through the door. Seeing the situation inside, he claimed to be a subordinate of the local crime boss. Ben threatened Rebecca to leave. After weighing her options, Rebecca got up to leave. Before leaving, she was certain that Elena would come looking for her. Sure enough, due to the family's struggling business and mounting debts, Elena really began to consider it. Ben, of course, couldn't just stand by. He hurriedly thought of ways to help Elena. Ben hacked into the currency exchange database. He adjusted the exchange rates up. Then Ben had Theo wait in front of the remittance machine. When the rates peaked, they would seize the opportunity to exchange money. But the ATM happened to be out of order today. Theo had to go through manual channels instead. With their cooperation, they successfully exchanged for $20,000. However, a guard stopped Theo. In a panic, Ben directly manipulated the situation to cause a surge in currency exchange. This successfully triggered chaos. He and Theo seized the chance to escape. Ben handed the $20,000 to Elena. He told her to go to the Mutual Aid Society to get a job, but Elena said the student who placed first in the exam was caught cheating, so the scholarship fell to her. But she wanted to give up the scholarship and leave with Ben, as the two were planning their future. Someone threw a bomb into the room. Ben blocked it with the table. Both of them were unharmed, but the $20,000 on the table was burned to ashes. The scene shifts back to 2074. Ben learned that Elena was still alive. He no longer wanted to have a child with Laura. Looking at the eagerly expectant Laura, he forced himself to act cheerful and appease his wife. He privately sought out Hendrik, asking him to help find male contraceptives. Back at the company, Roger eagerly approached Ben to provoke him. He accused Ben of relying on his connections, while casually bringing up Arcadia. He wanted to test Ben's attitude. Fortunately, Ben reacted quickly and deflected the comments back at Roger. Returning to the office, Roger became increasingly angry, so he went to his father George. Roger hoped that he could get help from him. George brought up the incident where Roger had caused a girl's death. He felt that Roger was still an immature child. Roger said he just wanted a promotion. He wanted his father to see that he was making progress. George was pleased by this flattery. He promised to help Roger get into Arcadia. When the father and son met to talk, George said he couldn't get Roger in, but he could arrange for Elena to come out and meet him. George needed to use many connections for this, so he asked Roger for something in return, such as persuading Roger's half-brother Mitchell to move out of the main house. Roger realized this was his stepmother's idea, and George was actually willing to indulge her, just because his stepmother had given him another child. He resented his father's favoritism, so Roger decided to find a way on his own. In the red zone, Theo has been doing well lately. He has helped Terrence win several matches in a row. Terrence placed a stack of cash on the table. He said this was Theo's share. Before Theo could reach for it, Terrence gave him another task. In the nearby neighborhood, Spade had received a scholarship through basketball. The family of the second-place winner hired Terrence to find a way to get Spade out of the competition. Theo was disgusted by such dirty dealings, but he couldn't resist Terrence and had to agree. In the green zone, a doctor entered the room. She informed the couple to avoid passing on defective genes to the next generation. They needed to undergo genetic testing. Laura's results were all normal, but Ben's genes showed elevated lead levels and a long-term, unresolved malaria defect. On the surface, Ben had lived as an upper-class person in the green zone his whole life, so this situation was quite rare. Faced with his wife's doubts, Ben made up a lie to cover it up. However, unexpectedly, even with Ben's genetic defects, Laura still decided to have their child. Ben looked at his gentle and caring wife, and he felt guilty again. On Roger's side, without his father's help, he had to investigate on his own. Roger went to Hendrik's department and tried to pull up Elena's file. Hendrik said Roger didn't have the authority and brushed him off. After Hendrik discovered that Roger was investigating Elena, He immediately contacted Ben to inform him. Ben then learned that the lockpick had been taken by Roger. After thinking it over, he decided to give Elena's file to Roger. At that time, Ben would black out the content and install a tracking device on Roger. This way, Roger would not only fail to obtain useful information, but also be monitored by Ben. With nothing to show for his efforts, Roger had no choice. He could only agree to his father's demands. Roger returned home to pick up Mitchell. Mitchell had undergone neural implants to supervise every employee for George's business, but after prolonged overuse of his brain, it damaged Mitchell's amygdala. Roger said the hospital could help Mitchell repair his neural connections. He urged Mitchell to move out of their father's house, but Mitchell ignored him. Roger continued that everything he was doing was to get revenge on their father, as long as he could climb to the position of vice president. Then their father, stepmother, and their children would be at the mercy of the two brothers. Only then did Mitchell agree to move out. In the red zone, Theo found Spade, who was playing basketball. He tried to approach him, but was spotted. Spade saw Theo and happily exclaimed that he admired Theo. Theo looked at the enthusiastic Spade and couldn't bring himself to act, so Theo could only arrange to meet Spade at a bar first. He would then slowly think of a plan. After getting Spade drunk, Theo took him to the back door. He pulled out a stack of money. Theo urged Spade to take his family and leave quickly, or else they would all be in danger. But that money was far from enough. Spade realized he couldn't escape. After Theo left, there might be even more ruthless people coming to trouble him, so he wanted Theo to break his leg. To provoke Theo, he mocked that Theo had done the same to stop his sister. Theo suppressed his guilt and broke Spade's leg with one kick. In the hospital, Diana finally regained consciousness. She had escaped from Izano. Now it was time to repay Spiga, so Diana told Elizabeth that Izano had recruited a genius named Sanjay. Sanjay had developed a method for seawater irrigation. This major discovery was enough to kick Spiga out of the game. Elizabeth decided to find Sanjay. Before leaving, Diana told Elizabeth the second secret, with a hint of apology. It turned out that before Elizabeth's husband passed away, Diana had been having an affair with him. Inside Spiga, Ben noticed through the tracking device that Roger had gone to the Bayard Hotel, so he immediately followed. Inside the Bayard Hotel, Roger and his father were quietly waiting for Elena. After Ben arrived, he activated an image distortion filter, so the surveillance couldn't capture his appearance. Then he finally saw Elena. Elena was elegantly made up with heavy makeup. She walked into the elevator under Ben's tender gaze. The scene shifts back 12 years. Hendrik had leveraged connections to find a job. He was about to leave this place, but Hendrik couldn't take Ben with him. At the time of parting, Ben gave Hendrik a homemade water spoon, although Hendrik wouldn't use it, but he still expressed gratitude to Ben. 6 years later, someone threw a bomb into Elena's store, directly causing a fire. Elena and Ben didn't know what to do. The firefighters refused to extinguish the fire, because Elena hadn't paid the fire fee. At this moment, Elena's father arrived. He believed that the person who threw the bomb was an enemy Ben had provoked. He scolded Ben harshly because of the unpaid debts. Elena's father Max was arrested and imprisoned. The conditions in the prison were poor. Max developed severe pneumonia while inside. He might not survive. Elena ultimately decided to sign a contract with Rebecca. After passing a series of health tests, Elena signed a 20-year servitude contract with Rebecca. As long as she pressed her thumbprint, Elena's father would be released. However, Ben interrupted everything. Ben urged Elena to give him a week to raise the money, but Max's condition couldn't wait that long. Elena still pressed her thumbprint, forcing Ben to forget her. Ben realized that the bombing was done by Rebecca. In order to coerce Elena, he angrily rushed toward Rebecca. Ben was knocked to the ground by her bodyguard. After Elena left, Ben drowned his sorrows in alcohol every day. One day, he ran into Hendrik. He learned that the job Hendrik found back then was actually in the green zone. Ben was angry at Hendrik for abandoning him after becoming successful. He threatened Hendrik to find a way to get him into the green zone as well. Hendrik reluctantly agreed, but he requested that Ben not think of climbing higher, as that could expose them. After disguising himself, Ben looked at his reflection, seeing himself as a social elite, and he smiled with satisfaction. 6 years later, in 2074, Ben pulled himself out of his memories and began to think of ways to rescue Elena. At this moment, Elena was in a room being questioned by Roger. Ben placed a listening device directly beneath their room. He happened to hear Elena revealing her background to Roger, but when Roger mentioned Ben, Elena claimed she didn't know him. Roger believed she was lying. He threatened to ruin her face. At this critical moment, Ben hacked into the air purification system and released gas into the room. The security rushed in to escort Elena out. After successfully defusing the crisis, Ben immediately rushed back to Spiga. He had an important meeting, but in the end, Ben was still late. Seeing the executives waiting for his report, Ben quickly explained the development process of the Clarity software. He said that if all went well, the software would be launched in 3 months. As the executives engaged in a heated discussion about Ben's research, Ben noticed through the tracking device that Roger had found Elena's old school. He was eager to leave the meeting, so Ben stopped the high-level discussions and promised to deliver the final version of the Clarity software within a month. On Roger's side, he still refused to give up the investigation. Roger went to inquire about Elena at her old school. He successfully bought Elena's father's number with money. Then, he sent an email to Elena's father, Max. Roger falsely claimed that Elena had died to arrange a meeting. At the agreed location, Roger showed Max a photo of Ben. As soon as he saw the photo, he began to curse. He said this person had ruined Elena's life. While Laura was alone at home, she received a special guest. It turned out to be Spiga's security chief Moss. Moss walked into the house and asked Laura with concern if she was still troubled by that incident from years ago. Laura replied that since that incident, she hadn't set foot in the red zone for 8 years. In the red zone, after Roger learned Ben's secret from Max, he exposed Ben's lies to his face. Ben told him to make any demands he wanted. He promised to withdraw from the promotion evaluation. Roger believed that Ben could lie even to his wife, so his words were completely untrustworthy. But Ben insisted. He only wanted to save his ex-girlfriend. Roger seemed to be moved. The two shook hands to seal the deal. Ben suddenly realized that Roger was recording him. The two immediately got into a scuffle.
You're gonna destroy everything. My family, you hurt my family.
After calming down, Ben called Theo over to handle the body. After they dealt with the car, Ben casually took Roger's watch. He said he would need it later. Theo returned home feeling frustrated. He found his father lying at the door. As soon as he saw him, Max began to express his hatred for Ben, but Theo said that Max was just avoiding responsibility. His sister had become like this because of Max. Moreover, after Max was released from prison, he was even manipulated into abandoning Theo. Therefore, Theo would never forgive his father. In the conference room, Theo pushed a body inside. The body suddenly moved. The moving fingers pulled open the body bag, revealing Roger's face. Ben instantly woke up from the nightmare. Outside the room, Laura was very concerned about the daughter of her neighbor. She called to check on her, but no one answered. Laura felt a bit worried, so she decided to overcome her psychological fears. Laura personally went to the red zone to visit them. 8 years ago, Laura was still a rebellious girl. She hid it from her mother and went with her friends to drink at a bar in the red zone. Unexpectedly, her mother had already anticipated everything. Elizabeth had installed tracking on Laura's car and sent 2 bodyguards to follow her. Laura didn't like the feeling of being watched, so she dodged the security's gaze and followed a man outside. Laura was blindfolded and taken to a house. There were only women and children inside. They didn't seem like ruthless criminals. A man told Laura that he had obtained her mother's phone number from Laura's phone. Laura was worried that he knew her mother was the president of Spiga. She lied, claiming her name was Armani. Meanwhile, at Spiga, Moss was requesting his superior Connor to transfer him to a town. But Connor, who appreciated Moss, did not agree. At this moment, the kidnappers sent a ransom video. Connor instructed Elizabeth to transfer the money to the kidnappers. He asked her to include a tracking program with the transfer. However, Elizabeth refused to pay the ransom. It turned out that if the transfer was authorized, according to the company's prevention and rescue policy, their primary goal would then become protecting the company's intellectual property. Laura's situation was dire. In the red zone, Laura couldn't believe her mother refused to pay the ransom. She could hardly believe it. At this moment, Elizabeth was still arguing her case. Relying on the support of the board, Connor ordered immediate action. Elizabeth could only promise Moss that she would help him with a transfer. In exchange, Moss had to rescue Laura before Spiga intervened. In the red zone, the kidnappers, unable to wait for the ransom, decided to take action. At this moment, Moss finally arrived in the red zone. After learning the kidnapper's address from the local corrupt officer, he hurried off to rescue her. On Laura's side, The female kidnapper was wiping the blood off her. She was even younger than Laura. Outside was just her nephew. His father had died while working on an oil pipeline. Soon after, the female kidnapper's sister was killed in an accident. The family was demanding ransom just to pay 6 months' rent. At this moment, the kidnapper noticed Laura's pendant. Only then did they realize she was the daughter of Spiga's president, so they raised the ransom from 50,000 to 5 million. The board was worried that Izano would act first and pay the ransom, thus taking control of Laura, so they went ahead, ignoring Elizabeth's objections, and transferred the money. Elizabeth was extremely anxious. She urged Moss to act quickly. Meanwhile, Laura was also preparing to save herself. She tried to grab the scalpel from the table, but Laura accidentally knocked it off. Fortunately, the kidnappers did not notice. They were discussing letting Laura go, but a suited kidnapper said that Spiga's people would kill them all. The fact that these big companies were willing to pay the ransom indicated the start of an intellectual property protection plan. This meant they didn't care about the hostages' lives at all. Laura seemed to think of something upon hearing this. After a brief moment of shock, she had to try her best to survive. Laura tipped over the stool. Then she grabbed the scalpel and cut the ropes. The kidnappers outside had already decided to kill Laura. As the female kidnapper entered the room to tidy up, Laura stabbed her to death. The male kidnapper discovered that his sister was dead. He immediately aimed his gun at Laura. At this moment, Moss finally arrived. He shot the kidnapper dead on the spot. Moss took Laura out of the room. Only then did Laura realize that, apart from the boy, the entire family had been killed. Back at Spiga, Elizabeth hugged her daughter and comforted her. But Laura understood from this kidnapping that her father's death years ago was not so simple. When her father was kidnapped, her mother could have saved him just like today, but she chose to give up on him instead. For all these years, she had continued to deceive Laura. Laura felt disappointed in Elizabeth. After Laura left, Moss urged Elizabeth to tell Laura the truth. It seemed that there were hidden truths about the kidnapping case from years ago. Moss then brought up their agreement, but Elizabeth said she had submitted a transfer request for Moss, but the executives did not approve it. She urged Moss to stay, because he was the only person she trusted. The scene shifts back to 2074. After recalling the past, she decided to confront her shadows, so she drove towards the red zone. At the same time, Ben was also in the red zone. He was modifying the tracking signal in Roger's watch. Ben intended to use this watch to make Spiga believe that Roger had defected. Theo took the watch and went to a bar in front of nearby Izano employees. He took out Roger's watch to trade it for drinks. An Izano employee expressed his willingness to pay $75 for the watch. After the deal, Theo quickly left. Over here, Laura finally arrived at the babysitter's house. The babysitter, upon hearing that Laura wanted to see her neighbor's daughter, hesitated for a moment before letting her in. A few days later, at Lake Missouri, this once prime fishing spot had turned into a wasteland by 2074. Two treasure hunters were scavenging there. A car suddenly drove by. They forced the car to stop and prepared to rob it. At Spiga, due to a previous commitment made at the board meeting, Ben had no choice but to ask Hendrik to help him test the Clarity software. He had too many secrets in his mind. In the company, only Hendrik was trustworthy. From Ben's memories, Hendrik discovered that Ben had actually killed Roger. On Laura's side, she was treating the neighbor's daughter. Laura suddenly received a message from Ben. She quickly packed her things to prepare to return to the green zone. But when Laura opened the door, she found the outside was filled with injured patients from the red zone. She couldn't pretend not to see them. Laura could only stay and treat them. While Laura was treating the patients from the red zone, the local leader Goran suddenly showed up. According to the rules, if Laura wanted to treat patients and make money, she had to pay Goran a protection fee. But Laura said this was free treatment. Upon hearing this, he ordered his men to capture Laura. After Laura was taken to Goran's territory, she thought she was facing another kidnapping, but Goran only wanted Laura to help him open a clinic. This would help Goran build a good reputation. Laura found it absurd and rejected Goran. However, when Laura tried to leave, Goran surprisingly didn't stop her. After Laura stepped outside, she didn't leave immediately. Recalling her experiences in the red zone, she looked pained, but thinking of the patients in the red zone, she ultimately decided to go back to find Goran. Laura was shocked to discover that his legs were prosthetic. At this moment in the green zone, Moss's daughter Jasmine wanted to invite a friend to hang out. but she was turned down by the friend's parents, because Moss was a ruthless security chief, and colleagues feared their family. Moss felt guilty about this, but work had to go on. At this time, Spiga received reports that Roger might have defected. Elizabeth was worried that Roger had truly sided with Izano, so she decided to immediately implement the previous Dr. Sanjay capture plan. Although they didn't know where Sanjay was, they could determine his location by interrogating his contact. So, as Contact Brill just left the Mutual Aid Society, he was blindfolded and abducted. Ben used the Clarity software to interrogate Brill. When asked where Dr. Sanjay was, Brill's mind showed an image of a herd of white horses. This vague information gave Ben a headache. He searched the term white horse in the database, and surprisingly found a base called White Horse, but he had a personal matter he wanted Brill to help with. Ben used the Clarity software to demand that Brill reveal the most humiliating thing in his life. Ben intended to use this to blackmail Brill, to help him and his friends escape from Spiga. As Brill pleaded, Ben saw Brill's secret. It turned out that Brill's child was born with defects. In order to free his child from suffering, Brill had personally killed his own child. Ben felt somewhat guilty, but this did not stop him from continuing his actions. Then, he used the Clarity software to erase Brill's memories of the interrogation he had just conducted. Meanwhile, Terrence was negotiating with a boss from the Green Zone. He wanted to split the winnings of both fighters, but Theo was short in stature. He had never used performance-enhancing drugs, or undergone enhancements. The Green Zone boss clearly did not trust Theo's strength, so Terrence suggested that Theo fight against the other fighter, Ralph. Before the match, Terrence administered a stimulant to Theo, but it would take some time to take effect. Theo was completely overpowered in the first half, but once the drug kicked in, he seemed like a different person. Theo became extremely exhilarated. He attacked his opponent ferociously, even biting his opponent's face off. The Green Zone boss quickly shouted for a stop. Terrence laughed triumphantly. In the Green Zone, Moss discovered a lockpick in Roger's office, but Roger was just a useless pawn. Moss didn't think it belonged to him. He found Roger's father George, and told him the company suspected Roger had defected. George didn't believe Roger could do such a thing. He mentioned that Roger had been trying to get promoted recently, and he told Moss about Elena. Ben still didn't know that Elena had already come to Moss's attention. After confirming that Brill's memories were completely erased, Ben felt a sense of pride, but he didn't have long to enjoy it. Ben heard the news that Morse brought a girl from Arcadia for interrogation. That girl was Elena. Moss asked Elena if Roger had inquired about his colleagues. Just as Elena was about to answer, Ben suddenly barged in and found a way to distract Moss. Ben exchanged a glance with Elena. Moss was called to Elizabeth's office. He informed Elizabeth about Roger's death. Moss suggested using the Clarity software to conduct an audit of the entire department. Ben discovered that the Clarity software had placed limitations on him. He immediately realized that Moss had begun to suspect him, so Ben went to Hendrik, asking him to help delete his past memories. But this state could only last for a few days. Hendrik had to help Ben restore his memories in time. Otherwise, Ben would forever forget his experiences in the Red Zone. When he opened his eyes again, Ben had become a resident of the Green Zone. After forgetting Elena, his heart rate was normal, and his blood pressure was low. He exuded a sense of relaxation. At Spiga, senior executive David learned that Roger had been killed by an insider. He ordered Moss to launch an immediate investigation, and demanded that Moss bypass Elizabeth to report the progress directly to him, but Moss refused his overture. At this moment, Ben was tenderly with his wife. After forgetting Elena, Ben wholeheartedly loved Laura. He even considered giving up his promotion to return to family life. Ben summoned a shopping assistant and planned to buy a ring to give to Laura. Elena's ring had already been forgotten by him. It hangs alone in Theo's house. Theo had become addicted to the stimulant by this time. He was in a constant state of exhilaration. Theo's behavior became violent and erratic. When his friend advised him to quit, he was thrown to the ground. Theo had overdosed on the stimulant. He was exhilarated every day. Terrence told him that there was a match to fight tonight. Theo carelessly agreed. Then he asked for a few more hits of the stimulant. As expected, in the arena, Theo still performed poorly in the first half. He lost his rationality in the second half. Once the drug kicked in, he violently attacked his opponent. His opponent was covered in blood. Soon, he collapsed to the ground and lay still.
He's dead. He's fucking dead!
In another corner of the Red Zone, Laura called in her former babysitter and asked the babysitter to help out at the clinic. As the babysitter hesitated, the clinic received its first patient. The boy had bought a bionic heart on the black market 10 years ago, but due to poverty, he had never updated the settings. To save the patient, Laura contacted the bionic company. She requested that they perform a remote reset on the heart. After searching the heart's serial number, the staff member stated that the heart was stolen. They could not provide service to a thief, but the patient's condition was critical. Laura decided to manually reset the bionic heart. Under X-ray guidance, she inserted a long and thin needle into the patient's body. Laura manually pressed the reset button. Only then did the patient escape danger. But at this moment, the staff from the bionic company arrived on the scene. The staff believed Laura had no right to reset the product on her own. He prepared to forcibly shut down the patient's heart. This was no different from killing the patient. As the two sides were at a standstill, Goran arrived at the scene. As the local leader, he threatened the staff. Soon, Goran chased them away. At Spiga, Ben was taken away by Moss. Moss intended to interrogate him using the Clarity software, but Ben had already erased his memories. He smoothly passed all of Moss's questions. Suddenly, an interrogator placed a photo of Roger's corpse in front of Ben. Ben was startled and asked in shock how Roger had died, yet his expression showed no signs of guilt. All signs indicated that he truly had no idea, but Moss refused to give up. He entered the interrogation room. Moss deliberately asked Ben who had framed Peterson, but Ben's performance still has no flaws. After leaving the interrogation room, Ben encountered Hendrik. Ben did not recognize Hendrik now. He only thought of him as a stranger or colleague, so Hendrik hesitated. He was supposed to restore Ben's memories immediately, but if Ben could remain in a state of amnesia, no one could expose his identity. His family in the Green Zone would not be torn apart. Hendrik fabricated a story to make Ben choose between family and friends. Ben chose family, so Hendrik decided not to help Ben restore his memories. Ben returned to his office and found contraceptives in his briefcase. Ben felt puzzled. Before he could think it through, he noticed that Roger's father had come to the company. He forgot that he was the murderer. Ben immediately approached to comfort him. Afterwards, Ben even sought out Moss. He said that Roger was his friend, and he had an obligation to help find the real murderer. By studying the tracking system of Roger's vehicle, he pinpointed the crime scene to an old warehouse in the red zone. The two immediately set off. After some searching, Ben found a lapel pin on the ground. After confirming that the warehouse was indeed the crime scene, they began to search for clues, but they only found a weather monitoring device nearby. Ben told Moss, by collecting data on how the wind hits the target each time, they could construct a 3D image of the crime scene. If the data was reliable, they could even see the murderer's face clearly. On Hendrik's side, he had just resolved a major issue. Hendrik hadn't relaxed for long when he received an email from Ben. It turned out that Ben had long anticipated Hendrik's betrayal, so he had recorded a threatening video in advance. Ben commanded Hendrik to help him restore his memories. Otherwise, he would expose Hendrik's identity. The deadline was 72 hours. Hendrik didn't want to give up. He went to Ben's secret base. Hendrik attempted to delete evidence that could expose his identity. Unexpectedly, Ben had anticipated this. Hendrik triggered the defense system that Ben had set up in advance. In the video, Ben shortened the deadline to 36 hours and threatened Hendrik again not to play tricks. On the other side, in order to find clues about Roger's death, Moss actually approached Goran. From their conversation, he learned that they were former comrades in the same unit. Moss came this time to ask for Goran's help in keeping an eye on information regarding Roger's case. After returning to Spiga, Moss informed Elizabeth that David wanted to kick her out of the board, so Elizabeth decided to find Dr. Sanjay as soon as possible. This way, she could gain a voice in the board. Finally, Ben's 3D image restoration was completed, but when he saw the face in the image clearly, Ben was shocked to discover that it was actually himself. Moss was still inquiring on the phone. The face that was restored was who? Ben could not possibly say that he was the murderer. He lied, claiming that the data was too mixed, and the results were not yet available. Ben hurriedly hung up the phone and began to examine another person in the 3D image. After identification, Ben discovered that the person was a boxer named Theo from the Red Zone. At this time, Theo had calmed down from his exhilaration regarding the matter of killing his opponent. He felt very guilty. Theo walked despondently down the street. He suddenly sensed that someone was following him, so Theo pulled the person in front of him. He realized that it was actually Ben. Inside the Research Institute, Dr. Sanjay was conducting an experiment on seawater irrigation. Suddenly, countless bullets pierced through the institute's doors. Sanjay's colleague was killed on the spot. Armed personnel from Spiga rushed in. They intended to take Sanjay away. Sanjay remained very calm. He said that if they wanted his research results, they would have to take the seeds as well. It turned out that Sanjay didn't care whom he worked for at all. He only wanted to free the people from hunger. Just as the Spiga personnel were preparing to retreat, the plane that was parked outside had disappeared. It turned out that Izano had discovered their plan. He modified Spiga's flight codes and directed the plane to crash into the foothills. Worse still, Izano's armed truck was rushing to the scene. The armed forces had already surrounded the location. Sanjay urged the Spiga personnel to hand over the research results in exchange for a way out from Izano. Elizabeth heard this through the screen, but she had other ideas. Elizabeth was worried that once Izano obtained the results, he would squeeze Spiga out of the market. Spiga would go bankrupt, and countless employees would be displaced to the red zone due to unemployment. Therefore, she ignored Moss's objections. Elizabeth insisted on sending drones to bomb the site, killing Sanjay along with everyone present. On the red zone side, Theo realized that Ben did not recognize him. He anxiously took out a photo of Elena. Theo tried to help Ben regain his memory, but Ben claimed that his beloved was his wife Laura. Theo laughed derisively. He took out Elena's ring and handed it to Ben. Ben immediately noticed that this ring looked very similar to the one he had bought for Laura. Seeing that Ben still had doubts, Theo took out a childhood photo of them. Ben was shocked to find that a person in the corner of the photo was his colleague Hendrik, so the two immediately set out to find Hendrik. Unexpectedly, Ben saw Peterson on the street. Peterson instinctively hated Ben. He rushed up and intended to strangle Ben, but Peterson was blocked by Theo. Ben felt confused, but he decided not to think about it for now. Ben found a mysterious location from the tracking records on his car. Then he hurriedly went with Theo. When they arrived, they saw a family having dinner there. Ben uncontrollably uttered a series of codes. The male head of the household immediately let them through. After that, Ben used muscle memory to find a hidden passage. Once inside, he found Hendrik there. Hendrik handed Ben the device to restore his memories. He let Ben make his own decision, but Hendrik warned him that Ben's original personality was a demon. Upon hearing this, Theo urged Ben to restore his memory to save Elena. Ben felt very annoyed and decided to be alone for a while. At Spiga, Chairman Fisher spoke with Elizabeth. The board was somewhat dissatisfied with Elizabeth. Spiga not only failed to secure Sanjay, but also lost its best search and rescue team. However, Fisher also said that the board recognized Elizabeth's firm stance in defending the company's interests. Overall, the board had a positive attitude towards Elizabeth. In the red zone, Theo attended the funeral of the boxer he had killed. The deceased's sister recognized that Theo was also a boxer, so she advised Theo to quit, not to end up like her brother Bowie, chasing fame and wealth at the cost of his life. The sisters suddenly realized from his evasive attitude that Theo was the one who killed Bowie.
You're here. I forgive you.
Theo could no longer hold back. He burrowed into his sister's embrace and cried. After returning home, Theo immediately packed his things to prepare to flee. Unexpectedly, Terrence had been waiting for a long time. At home, Ben and Laura both felt troubled, so they turned to drinking to drown their sorrows. That night, Ben secretly got out of bed. In the end, he chose to restore his memories. The next day, Ben, now fully back to his first personality, showed the modified 3D image to Moss, saying that the person who killed Roger was Peterson, and that due to insufficient data, he couldn't reconstruct the accomplice's face. But Moss clearly did not believe him. Afterwards, Ben found Hendrik and wanted to continue seeking his help, but Hendrik said that they were no longer connected. Inside Laura's clinic, Elizabeth finally discovered her daughter's actions. She was worried that if Laura's identity was exposed, she would be kidnapped again. Laura said that her mother could give her up, just like she gave up her father. In desperation, Elizabeth told Laura the truth from the past. It turned out that Laura's father was not kidnapped, but had defected to Izano's company. Elizabeth had to kill Laura's father herself, because if collusion was discovered, Laura would meet the same fate as Peterson's child. After returning to Spiga, Elizabeth called Ben in for a conversation. After confirming Ben's identity through a blood test, Elizabeth told Ben a good news. The higher-ups decided to promote Ben to the 40th floor. After the conversation ended, Moss found David from the drone bombing incident. he witnessed Elizabeth's ruthlessness, so Moss decided to join David's camp, but with one condition, that David would help him get reassigned. Moss said he had applied 8 years ago. David replied that no application had been submitted to the board back then. Moss instantly realized that Elizabeth had never helped him 8 years ago. On Ben's side, he returned home one day and keenly noticed that the atmosphere in the house was off. Sure enough, a group of black-clothed men suddenly appeared and knocked him unconscious. When he was awake, Ben found himself tied to a chair. The house was filled with mysterious men in black. The leader of the men opened a bottle of wine, and Ben glanced over to find it was the very bottle he and Laura had emptied the night before. The leader demanded that Ben tell him information about the Clarity software. He even resorted to torture on Ben, but Ben stubbornly refused to speak. At this moment, Laura returned home. The men in black immediately used Laura as leverage against him. Laura was worried about her husband's safety. She urged Ben to share the information with the men, but Ben noticed that his wife's ring was not on her hand. He had indeed given it to Laura, but Laura seemed unaware of the ring's existence. The men grew impatient, and one of them aimed a gun at Laura, threatening Ben to betray Spiga with Laura's life. However, Ben already had a rough idea of what was happening. He refused to disclose the intelligence. The man pulled the trigger and killed Laura outright. As Ben was collapsing and screaming, time rewound. He pulled himself out of the illusion. It turned out that everything just now was just a job assessment from Spiga, and Ben had successfully passed the test. After returning home, Ben embraced Laura. He noticed the ring on Laura's hand and felt a sense of relief. Then he went to the red zone to find Brill. Ben hinted to him that he knew the secret of him killing his own child. He blackmailed Brill into helping him and his friends escape Spiga. Additionally, he wanted Brill to prepare a body to replace him, so that Spiga would believe Ben was merely dead, and not a defector, because Ben did not want to endanger Laura. After the plan succeeded, he would offer the Clarity software as a reward to Brill. Inside Laura's clinic, Laura had to treat various patients every day. The boy who had undergone heart surgery also helped out, while stopping the bleeding for a new patient. Laura discovered that the self-stitching agent that had just arrived yesterday now only had one left. It seemed that there was a thief in the clinic. She began to investigate who had stolen the self-stitching agent. Unexpectedly, it turned out to be the boy with the bionic heart. Laura found Goran and said that she had found the thief. Laura decided to expel him from the clinic, but Goran said that such a weak approach would only lead to more serious consequences. After serious consideration, Laura felt that Goran's words made sense, so she suppressed her guilt and fear, and ordered someone to chop off the boy's hand as punishment. On Ben's side, he had successfully entered Arcadia as a high-ranking member. In the hall, Ben immediately spotted Elena, so he quickly approached her. As the two chatted over drinks, Elena noticed the wedding ring on Ben's hand. She led Ben into a room. Elena mocked the other party for having a wife and coming to such a place. Ben confessed that he had deceived and used everyone. He had even killed a friend. All of this was to save Elena from this life. Elena was somewhat moved, but in the end, she opened the door and let Ben return to his wife. Hendrik found Ben and told him that he was in trouble because of nostalgia. Hendrik had left the water key that Ben had given him. The water key was taken to school by Hazel. When the teacher found it, the key was confiscated, and the teacher would certainly report this matter to the security department. Hendrik's identity would soon be exposed. Ben felt very anxious upon hearing this. He called Brill and requested to move the plan forward to within 24 hours. He looked at Laura, who had just returned home, and thought about how he would soon have to leave her. His eyes were filled with reluctance. On the other side, Moss led his team to find Peterson. He demanded that Peterson come with him. Just as Peterson was about to agree, he suddenly had an illusion, and mistook the guard in front of him for Ben. He viciously lunged at the guard. Peterson was shot dead on the spot. Meanwhile, Terrence took Theo into the green zone to box. The lavish lifestyle there bewildered Theo. As he passed through the crowd, Theo spotted his opponent for the night in the pool. Terrence held a stimulant up to Theo's mouth, but Theo ignored him completely. He jumped straight into the ring. Without the effects of the drugs, Theo quickly was knocked down by his opponent. He got back to his feet right away. Theo appeared to be unyielding, but he did not fight back. Instead, he stood there and let his opponent hit him. He intended to die in the match. Terrence caught on to this, so he immediately jumped into the pool to stop Theo. To punish Theo, he specifically brought in Theo's friend Anthony. Seeing his friend about to die under Terrence's gun, Theo quickly said that he knew a secret about a high-ranking official in Spiga. Terrence became interested. Theo revealed Ben's background to Terrence, so that he could use this to blackmail Ben for profit. This was how Anthony was saved from Terrence. On Laura's side, she unexpectedly initiated a conversation with her mother, because Laura was also forced to have blood on her hands. She could understand her mother's ruthlessness now. However, Laura stated that she would not close the clinic. If she found out that her mother sent someone to monitor the clinic again, she would order her men to shoot on the spot. Hearing her daughter speak so harshly, Elizabeth smiled with relief. On the other side of the red zone, Brill was waiting at the agreed-upon location. Unexpectedly, Ben changed his mind at the last minute. He asked Brill to help Hendrik and Hazel escape, while he stayed behind. After saying this, Ben handed the Clarity software to Brill. Hendrik was deeply moved, and thanked Ben. After hugging, they parted ways. Then, Ben found Elena to express his helplessness. He felt that he had become a demon. Elena changed her previously resistant attitude, and gently comforted Ben. Ben picked up on her signals of reconciliation, and immediately kissed her. After some time, Ben moved into a luxurious villa that suited his status. Meanwhile, Peterson, whom he had treated as a stepping stone, was now being buried by dirt. After Terrence obtained a photo of Ben, he began to think about how to blackmail Ben. On Laura's side, she was pleasantly surprised to discover that she was pregnant. The development of things is becoming increasingly out of control. Ben was completely unaware of this. He sat in the exclusive office for high-ranking members, quietly looking out at the bustling scene outside. As a futuristic sci-fi series, Incorporated does a good job of detailing its elements. The settings like the Clarity software and whistle devices indeed give a strong sense of technology. However, the plot lacks originality. It still revolves around the cliched post-apocalyptic class struggle backdrop. Yet the series doesn't focus on the struggles between classes. Instead, it consistently revolves around romance. All the main characters are driven by love, although the last few episodes hinted at character growth. But given that the series has not had a second season in all these years, it seems unlikely that day will come. If you enjoy my channel, please click to subscribe.